Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi. Today's review, we're going to be looking at cookies. So let's take a look at the provision today. I don't want to spend too much time on the notice and all that, so I'm just going to opt out. I'm only going to spend 1 minute on this. First of all, I want to talk about the supplier that is managing the consent preferences. The only comment that I want to make is about the different colored buttons. You can see the reject all is white with a black background. This one is also white with a black background, and this one is orange with a white background, right? As businesses, we need to think very carefully about our user experiences. The last thing that I'm going to mention is that I've never been opted in, so I'm just going to save my preferences since both of these are off. I actually wanted to get into the substance of the provisions on the policy. The first thing I want to do is I want to take a look at when this was last updated. Now, why is that influential, and why do I particularly put a lot of energy in looking at that? As business owners, our sites often change, like our offerings, right? Let's say in 2022, you had offering A, but then in 2023, you added offering B, C, and D. I think a great example of this is the iPhone, right? Every year, the iPhone has a new iteration, right? And so the offerings that are on the website for Apple, they evolve because we have more products and services. So how the interface of your site is going to evolve too. The value in looking at the date for when cookies are updated, the value that is if the manner in which, let's say you create a new web page or you update an existing web page to reflect your new products and offerings, you need to also manage the cookies associated with that, because the provisions that you've drafted in your policy or notice are dictated by the previous offerings. If you've introduced offerings, you need to make sure that they align with the new cookies, if applicable, right? If your new web page doesn't have any cookies or doesn't have any tracking technologies, then you have nothing to worry about. But it's still important to take a look at making sure that you align every addition. Whoever is managing the site also needs to be informed of any additional updates to the cookie policy, if applicable, and add them. Right? So you're constantly looking at this document. You're constantly looking at the privacy policy and privacy notice, because they're influenced by any changes you make to your digital storefront. I like to think of the website as the digital storefront. Let's say you go to my firm's website, and on the firm's website, you see, oh, Funmi Owolabi or whatever. So you go to my site and you see that. And then let's say I offer a new service, right? And I create a new web page to reflect this new service. I have not done this. This is just an example. Whatever types of tracking technologies I associate with that brand new web page needs to be reflected in my cookie policy if it's not already there. If it is already there and I've modified it, I need to change the language slightly. Personal data affects our businesses in every single way, right? How we process it and our obligations under the data protection laws are influenced by the activities that we do, okay? So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's actually look at the substance. I didn't find a date, but the very good thing that I did see was we got the notice and we also had the preference center. So we exercised our preferences. What type of cookies does this website use? Now, one of the things that I've done in other reviews, and you can take a look at those, is I always align the provisions that exist in the policy document itself with what is offered in the preference center. So another thing that I want to mention is it's really important for organizations to reconcile the information that they present in their cookie policy with what is presented in the preference center. Now, let me tell you what sometimes happens. Sometimes the business forgets to let their consent management platform provider know about updates that have been made in the site. Let's talk about me. For my own personal site, I rarely make tweaks to the website because my service offerings are the same and the product and service that I have are legal services, right? If you make an inquiry to talk to me, then we can talk about it on the phone. I rarely change my site. But for a more dynamic site that is constantly making like tweaks, let's say a restaurant, let's talk about restaurant industry. You have different types of plates and offerings. You update your menu on a weekly basis or something like that more frequently. If you're making a lot of changes, what happens is you're making those changes much quicker than you're able to reflect that information to your provider. So what happens sometimes is the cookies that are displayed in the policy are not reflected in the preference center because the usage has changed, the types have changed far more quickly than what you're able to reconcile with your provider. Now, let me tell you something that I believe could assist with this. If you're changing the website a lot and you're not able to articulate that to your provider, I think a really good idea here is to set periodic reviews once every 3 months if it's changing a lot, once every 6 months if it doesn't change all that much. Pencil it in like you would pencil in any other recurring meeting that needs to happen to make sure that you're taking a look at it periodically, because most businesses are contingent upon processing personal data. You cannot have customers if you don't process personal data, right? So it's within your interest to keep the business moving by maintaining your obligations and the requirements that you're meant to upkeep as a data controller by setting it into a system and periodically reviewing it. Hey, we've made 10 changes to the website. Let's be honest, the security team is going to be able to have their own tracking report. Maybe they use Jira. They are being able to keep a record of the changes that have happened to the site. So when you pencil in review privacy facing documents, June and December, right? Any changes that have been made to the site that your security team have already manifested and recorded, you can send those back to your consent management platform provider if applicable, and you can make the necessary updates on a periodic basis. If you pencil it in, it's more likely than not going to happen. And then you can put last updated at the top to reflect that, one, you're doing your due diligence as it pertains to your obligations under the privacy laws, and two, it's something that you're taking into consideration to keep your business going, because your business relies on personal data. And that's the real life cycle essentially. Okay, so we've got the technical cookies, analysis cookies. What use do we give to the different types of cookies? So they add this here. I always reconcile this language against what's being presented to the consent management provider as well. Something that I have noted in my practice is sometimes the language that's used on the cookie policy itself on the site does not align with the language that's used by the consent management platform. I think a conversation at the beginning, or if you're scheduling calls periodically to do an audit of your public-facing privacy documentation, you can also make sure that you review and have a checklist. And I do provide a checklist to clients on what they need to be doing periodically to ensure that they maintain their compliance. So we've got technical personalization, analytics, and advertising. Ensuring that this language is reflected in the consent management platform is very important. Acceptance of the cookie policy. The user expressly accepts, by using the site, the processing of the information collected in the manner and for the purpose mentioned above. Let's talk about tone and audience. The tone of this sentence, I'm going to read it again very slowly. The user expressly accepts, by using the site, the processing of the information collected in the manner and for the purposes mentioned above. Now, I understand this language. I understand what this language is asking because I am a data privacy lawyer, okay? I understand what constitutes processing. I understand what is anticipated when it comes to expressly accepting. But the audience here are people that are trying to buy food, right? The restaurant. So when drafting these, it's really important for organizations to address the audience. Would an ordinary person visiting the restaurant understand this sentence? Would an ordinary person visiting the restaurant understand what constitutes processing? And what does expressly accept means to somebody that is a restaurant visitor? Let's read the next sentence. And you also acknowledge knowing the possibility of rejecting the processing of this data or information by rejecting the use of cookies by selecting the appropriate settings for this purpose. This is a very long sentence, right, in my opinion. And there's a lot happening in this sentence that I am interested in whether a consumer of the restaurant would understand. So as privacy lawyers, we draft a lot of documentation. We draft documentation that is explicitly for the review of vendors and suppliers. We draft privacy documentation for ordinary consumers that exist on a website that reflect the audience for the products and services for clients. We also draft documentation that is for a legal audience. We also draft documentation for an executive audience, right? There's a particular tone that needs to be articulated when we draft our privacy documentation, and it's really important for businesses to make those distinctions. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments about what I stated, leave them below, and I'll see you in another review.